moved and transported ourselves, got involved in creating a bike sharing system for college campuses. And that was kind of my foray and invitation into the entrepreneurial world. I worked on this program with the 3 other gentlemen that you see at the bottom of this photo for 5 years. And we launched systems and tried our very darndest to start a company that sold bike sharing systems to college campuses. It was what I often refer to as my MBA in entrepreneurship, because I kind of think it's the only way to learn is to practice. And practice we did. It was a really incredible experience. I learned a ton through just getting in there and seeking to bring an idea to life. And I also got to ride a few of our systems, which was one of the most amazing moments to get to experience an idea in your head in the world. So I was bitten by the entrepreneurial bug right away. And through the act of getting to experience this, I saw what it meant to be able to take your ideas and bring them into the world and offer them to people as something meaningful and valuable. And I find that that spark of inspiration and the things that call to us really have so much learning, not just for the people that we can offer something to, but for ourselves along the way and how we can grow and develop. We worked on this idea for 5 years, and at the end had to come to the hard reality that many entrepreneurs face, that we couldn't figure out how to create a sustainable business doing this. And we folded the company, and it sent me into my work doing a lot of self-discovery and emotional intelligence, and then working often with entrepreneurs, applying those tools together and realizing how do we grow as individuals and bring that into our work so that we can really effectively steward the ideas that we have. So that's how I got started on this path. And along the way, I started to partner with a really incredible group that's based in Baltimore, the Conscious Venture Lab, which is created by Jeff Cherry, who you see in the upper left
Hey,
corner.
Allie, I think you need to share your slides again.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you for catching that. Now you guys, can you see?
Yes, thank you.
Great. Did you catch the last? Was this one
No.
working? Oh man, sorry y'all. Hopefully the story shared. Yeah, here's a quick, is this still sharing for you guys? Okay, great. So a quick review of the bike sharing, and then the Conscious Venture Lab, who I've partnered with for the last 6 years. And a lot of the content that we're going to explore today comes out of this partnership and the work that we've done together. So I wanted to give them a big shout out and the work that they're doing in stewarding what is often called the conscious capitalism movement, and new paradigms for business that are allowing us to lead companies in new and different ways. So with the Conscious Venture Lab, I've been working with startups and entrepreneurs all over the world who are here to grow a business differently and want to get into the complexities and the nuance of what does it actually mean to build a business in a different way and operate out of different paradigms. And these are some of the incredible folks that I've gotten to work with. And the content we're going to explore today is kind of a slice of what we do together in this program as well, and the folks who are actively grappling with these things and what does it mean to put them into practice in our work. So to begin, I'd also love to know what brings you here and what would you like to learn from this session today. I think we've got a lot of folks who are, I'm sorry, I'm just now seeing your messages. We have a lot of folks who are either, it seems like, working with entrepreneurs or are entrepreneurs themselves. So I would love if you're open to sharing what would be most interesting to you to learn from this session, or what about values-based entrepreneurship and conscious business is intriguing to you. I will make sure that we are able to get to that. And you can put it in the chat, or if anybody has anything they want to share, you're also welcome to raise hands and share it out loud. Anybody? Okay, great. Interested in knowing how to build a business from an idea and what resources to use. Okay, great. Well, that will begin that process, and that is a big, big question. So hopefully we can sprinkle some more resources for you and places to go, Edward, to work with that. John says, keeping values through scaling a company is essential insights on how to do that. Awesome, awesome, awesome. And Katie, I see your hand.
Hi.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Yeah, I work with a lot of tech companies that raise venture capital and scale and grow, and I work with a lot of founders. And I think, learning ways to help guide the sort of sticking to values and not necessarily having mission creep through that scaling process. I think others here kind of have a similar thing. I just think it's really important to be able to help founders and entrepreneurs, really stick with the values that are important when growing and scaling a business.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you. Great. Yes, I'm seeing that question as well here. And are there standard business models like ESG, triple bottom line, social conscious, inclusive capitalism? Yeah, I mean, you're naming a lot of them, Ron, of the options that exist. That is great. Great question. Emily, how do you find investors that are interested in helping people before profits? Excellent, excellent seed to plant. And Mark, how companies are implementing value-based decisions with values incorporating something other than finance profit. Awesome. Great. Wonderful. Thank you all. And I'll make sure we get to as many of these as we can, or at least plant seeds for where to go for additional resources for the things we can't cover today. Thank you. And Katie, I see your hand still. Did you have another comment or from before?
No, I'll put it down. Thanks.
Okay, great. Thanks. Awesome. Great, great. Okay, tucking those in, and we're going to continue along the way. Let's see. Leading. We're going to kick off with leadership. And what does it mean to be leading in new ways? I like to start with this one because truthfully, as entrepreneurs, leadership is the heart of it, right? How we show up and how we be and how we impact those around us through our leadership is some of the most essential and most important ways that we start cultivating leadership in new ways. And if we look around in our culture, we often see leadership being exhibited in ways that we may not be wanting to model, right? It's pretty easy to see, look out and see what we don't want to experience. And it's a lot harder to look out and see what we do. So that makes leadership a pretty tricky and nuanced thing. And it does actually require a lot of inner work for a leader to understand who do they want to be and how do they show up in that way, and really make sure that they can have both the reflection and the support so that they can constantly be growing in who they are. And I want to put forward, because a lot of what we're going to explore is how is leadership done differently. And do we have any Brene Brown fans in the room? I've definitely been a huge fan of hers. And I find that her definition of leadership is one that I come back to often. A leader is someone who takes responsibility for finding the potential in people and processes and has the courage to develop that potential. it's really not about necessarily your title or whether you are the entrepreneur or not. It's about finding that courage and the ability to kind of step up in who you want to be, and standing for the potential that we can become. Leaders are often also about a vision. It's about seeing things that isn't yet in front of us and helping people get there, and who we be as a way to steward that is really deeply important. I thought that one thing I might do to just explore what leadership can look like differently is actually to read a short excerpt, a short story that comes from Kip Tindall, who was the former founder and CEO of the Container Store. And Kip was a part of a leadership book that a mentor of mine wrote, and she interviewed him and was asking him to tell her about people who inspired him to be the leader that he is. And if anyone is familiar with Kip Tindall, he's someone who's pretty outspoken about believing in love as a really important aspect to leadership. And it's something that we don't usually talk about with business. It's not really included in the business world. And yet, if we look to find folks who are leading in different ways, sometimes we'll find that they come back to qualities like love. And what does it mean to be a servant leader and somebody who's here to serve others? So when my mentor, Cosmina, was interviewing Kip for this book she was writing, she asked him to tell her a story about leadership and who inspired him to be a leader. And this is one of the stories that he shared with her. The second story about leadership that I keep close to my heart comes from my art teacher in the 5th grade, a wonderful woman named Ann McGee Cooper, who had a sign on her classroom door that said "Imagination's Growing Place." She was creative and fun and really let our imaginations run wild. In one of those amazing coincidences you could never make up, Anne went on to become a professor, an author, a consultant, and a leading expert in the creative approaches to business. Anne is a passionate advocate of servant leadership, and recently she told me a moving story that illustrates how well our principal, Mr. Thompson, was the very embodiment of servant leadership. One morning, Anne dropped off her 18-month-old baby at daycare, and she pulled into the parking lot 20 minutes late, not for the first time. When Mr. Thompson, running up to her car, she thought immediately she was going to be fired on the spot. Instead, he said, "How can I help you?" He had immediately sized up the situation. She was in a very difficult marital circumstance that was often chaotic. So he helped her carry her box of art supplies into the school, got the class started with the Pledge of Allegiance, and said, "Anne, I would like to take your class for a while. I'll bet you would like a cup of coffee and a few minutes to yourself." Anne washed her face and tried to pull herself together. She went back to class. A few hours later, she went to Mr. Thompson's office, still expecting to get fired. "I'm so sorry I'm late. I know it's not the first time and it won't be the last time. I just want to get this over with." Mr. Thompson stopped her, sat her down, took her by her hand, and said, "Anne, I'm a grandfather and I grew up on a farm. So I get up early. You're a young mother, and the most important thing for you is to get your boy up in the morning, get a good breakfast in him, and get him off to daycare. So I'll tell you what, we'll be partners. I want you to know that whenever you get here, you will be the teacher every child in this school needs. You will find ways to reach into their hearts and minds and create miracles in their lives. This school needs you. And I will watch your parking space. If the bell rings and I don't see your car, I want you to know that I will be in your room teaching until you get there." At that point, Anne said, nearly in tears as she told the story, "I wanted so badly to be the person he saw in me. I knew I wasn't that person yet, but I really, really wanted to be." And I like to use that story as an example of this type of leadership, of what it means to cultivate potential, and being the type of leader who seeks to understand, to know who we're working with and who we have impact on, and the ways in which we can bring out the potential in someone who we might be working with, rather than using our power to maybe create more havoc in folks' lives, in people's lives, and to be able to come from a place of love and empathy first in the way that we're interacting with others. Kip also went on to share this quote, talking about his inspiration watching Herb Kelleher, who's the founder of, or the co-founder of Southwest Airlines, who said that a company is stronger if it is bound by love rather than by fear. When I heard this, I was completely taken by it. I knew instinctively this is how I wanted to lead my own company. Brutal rank and yank management tactics and the like are what give business a bad reputation. Folks might have gone to war and come back with some of that attitude, and it works for war, but it's not a way to run a business. And I felt like this quote really embodies this shift that we're seeking to make, because it's still a part often of our leadership tactics that come from a place of fear or powering over others. And when we look at some of the companies we most revere and we most admire, the founders are able to root into a source of love, compassion, and empathy for those that they're here to serve, and use that as the foundation of their leadership. And it is different than what we've experienced, but hopefully it's also offering us a new model for how we can be and impact each other in new ways. So those are just a couple of examples of folks and ways that they're leading differently. I'm curious for you all, if you have people that you look up to who inspire you as a leader, and who some of those people might be, and what about them. And we'll use that definition that Brene Brown planted, that it's not about your title. We can see leadership at any level, in any place in our lives, maybe in some of the most overlooked corners. So when we're talking about leadership here, we're talking about the qualities of courage and what people stand for. So I'm curious if you all have folks who inspire you as leaders, and what some of those qualities in leadership that you see are. And if you have anything that comes to mind, you're welcome to type it in the chat or share it. And I'm going to take my slides off the main view for a second so I can see the chat. Greg Boyle from Homeboy Industries. Yes, awesome. Thanks, Cecilia. Mark Bainoff, unafraid to engage values to a wider audience and admit mistakes and then improve. John, I love that. Yes, admitting mistakes, not always something we see in leadership. Deeply, deeply important. Thank you. Katie, willing to listen, to seek to understand, speak last, and publicly change their minds. I love that. Yes, absolutely. And so much of that is about modeling these other ways of being, that we can be strong and we can change our minds, that we can be strong and we can admit mistakes, and that maybe that actually makes us a stronger leader and someone who can cultivate trust more powerfully with the folks that we lead, and be more effective as well at the same time. If there's any other examples of leadership, feel free to put them, keep sharing them in the chat. And I will share that I recently have been starting to follow actually an activist from New Mexico, Lila June Johnson, who I just deeply admire her fierce honesty and her willingness to say what's true, even in hard circumstances. And that's a quality of leadership I've really come to deeply admire and respect. So, leaving you all with a couple of questions for reflection here. What qualities of leadership do you want to embody? And leadership is certainly a personal thing, right? So I'm putting forward some of these pieces here. And like I said at the top of this workshop, this isn't necessarily about just what I think. It's inviting you into the exploration of what feels true for you. What are the ways that you want to lead? What qualities do you want to be embodying? What are some of your natural strengths that help you get there? Who are you already that brings that out, that type of leadership? And like we always have strengths, we also always have areas to grow. And what are some of the areas that you'd most like to grow and develop to be that leader? And what practices can support you in that? So I invite you to come back to that as a reflection for this section if you'd like, and as well as leaving you with a couple of great resources if you want to go deeper. This article from Inc. lists actually it's very cut and dry, but there's 21 qualities of leading from the heart as leaders that are things like we've just mentioned here, of being willing to listen, seeking to understand, being willing to admit mistakes, having humility. They can just be a great guidepost to come back to. Brene Brown's podcast is an amazing one, just excellent conversations that I really recommend. And a different mentor of mine, Dr. Gerald Suarez, wrote a great book on Leader of One and what it means to come from within when we lead. So those are some great resources you can take a look at to come back to that. So we'll move now from leadership into understanding our part in an ecosystem. This to me is one of the places within business that we can really shift the needle, because so often, especially within our culture, we're really trained to think about what's my idea and what is the thing I want to bring into the world. And that's deeply, deeply important. And yet we're also part of an ecosystem. We impact so many different aspects of our community, our culture, our environment, simply by existing. And this is a huge place where by really increasing our awareness of the ecosystem we're a part of, we can really start to tend to the relationships that we are interwoven in new and meaningful ways. And if we can kind of take the blinders off of profit alone, often, especially within the conscious capitalism movement, founders are really encouraged to think about their shareholders and the shareholder value only. Sometimes we think about customers and customers only, but the challenge when we're getting so singularly focused is that we forget we're part of a whole. And there's a lot of research that's been done that shows that companies who can understand that and can do a better job of tending to the greater web of the stakeholders that they are contributing to and who contribute to them, the more effective they're going to be in their operations. And so this looks like so many things. It looks like the families of the employees that we have on our team, right? It looks like our vendors and our suppliers, maybe the people who are physically next door to the place that we rent for our source of business. We are impacting and impacted by so many relationships. And when we can learn to see that and start finding mutual and reciprocal sources of value, we're able to really expand the impact the business has, as well as our effectiveness in how we run and operate. John Muir, the famous naturalist, has said that when you tug at a single thing in nature, you find it is connected to the world. And to me, this is a big source of inspiration for how we can think about our businesses. We are connected to everything. And part of the challenge within the way business is done currently is that we're able to only think about very specific outcomes. When we're expanding to see that our business lives within a web of relationships, we can really expand that awareness and how we're tending to and cultivating all of the people that we impact and those who impact us. And really fascinating results can come of that. There's a story that I often tell and actually show a video of. You can look this up and see this online, of John Mackey, who's the founder of Whole Foods, talking about in the very early days of Whole Foods, like their first year of business, they went through a flood in Austin and the store just entirely flooded and all their produce was like gone. And they were basically going to have to completely go under. And all of a sudden, they noticed that people from the community were coming out and helping them clean up. Banks were reaching out to them and asking them what they could do to help support them. And people were able, vendors were willing to provide produce again for them on a line of credit, which they didn't have a lot to go off of in that moment. And yet John Mackey talks about that the only reason Whole Foods continued was because everyone in the community came out to support them through that catastrophe. And there would be no Whole Foods if they hadn't had the support of folks around them, of people willing to take a risk. And the reason that they did is because they loved what this company was offering to their community. There wasn't another natural grocery store at the time that was of that same kind of caliber and quality, and they wanted them to continue. They wanted them to exist. And because they cared for those relationships and thought about those relationships, they were able to survive as a business. And I think COVID also illustrates this. If you think about most likely your experience in the pandemic, are there small businesses that you've wanted to see survive in your community because you know how important they are to your day-to-day existence? We need each other and we're interdependent on each other. And if a business goes away, the folks who come and participate in that business will notice. People who rely on that business, maybe as a vendor to sell something for them, notice. Like, there's so many ways that we impact and need each other. And the more able to tend to that we are, the better able we are to grow a business that can survive and thrive. And so the tangible, practical way of doing this is to really map your ecosystem. So here's another activity that I often suggest founders come back to and create a visual of, so that you can actually see what this web looks like for you and are able to see the threads that go in between each of these relationships that exist within a business. And there's an example on this slide of some of the types of things that can go into your ecosystem. And I encourage you to really get outside the box and see for your own business, what are the different aspects of your ecosystem that are involved? Who are all the people that impact you, and who do you impact? And what are these new threads of care and relationship or value? Where can value be created in the relationships that you have, or amongst people who are in your web that you may be able to help connect with each other? And these are new ways that we can actually be cultivating value, as well as I think that this can come back to us, not that we need it always to come back to us, but in terms of opportunities, in terms of people creating more loyalty and trust, and being able to develop a much stronger knit environment for your business to thrive. Just like with John Mackey and Whole Foods, realizing, oh, we can actually survive better if we're really deeply connected and interwoven with our customers and the people we get our loan from, and our vendors and our suppliers. All of them matter at that level. And it's not just one that we're focused on. So that's an introduction to thinking about ourselves within an ecosystem. I wanted to pause here before we move on to the last couple and see if there's any questions about what we have covered so far. anything lingering, things making sense, anything that, even if things aren't sitting well with you or you're grappling with something, there is space for that. I welcome that to come forward as well. So by all means, you don't have to agree with me. And I welcome any comments or questions. Just want to give a little space for that before we move forward. And if anything's resonating or you're liking it, feel free to share that as well. And Russell, I see getting the links again to the resources. Yes, absolutely. Was it to the resources? Correct me if it was to something else. Yes, and I'll make sure that you guys will get the slides too, and the links are in there. Yay, love the ecosystem map. Such a helpful visual for thinking of yourself and your business as a part of an ecosystem. Absolutely. And truly, if you want to create the space to map it, having it visual can be really supportive and helpful, because you can start to see where those relationships are. And if you keep it visual in a space where you sit down to do work, it's also a great place to remind yourself of that ecosystem. And if you need to generate new ideas or think about places that you want to go to, be able to maybe cultivate some new business opportunities or collaborate in a new way, or think about who could be of support to you, or how could you generously be of support to someone else. It's just a great visual thing to have in your space. Yes, 100%. Our actions ripple for sure. Okay, well, feel free to keep adding comments if you'd like as we go. And we're going to keep on moving down the line with these last two. Rooting into values is our next one. And this is kind of a crux of why we're here and what it means to be cultivating these deep roots. Just out of curiosity, does anyone have like ways that you already see values playing out in your work, or things that you value, and the ways that you operationalize your values? Does anyone have examples or things that they've noticed, or maybe in other companies that they admire? Can't see the chat, so I just want to check. And if none, we can keep going. Okay, well, we'll come to some, so you have some planted in your mind. And I want to link this to culture, and what role do values mean in our culture, and why does culture matter? Because we're running a company, culture could seem like a soft thing, although it seems like we're coming into much greater awareness that it's deeply meaningful. Something that I found as a really interesting comment about culture comes from Cosmina Popa, who says that whenever people come together in groups or organizations, a heartbeat emerges. So literally anytime we gather, there's something we feel in the space that is created when we're together. And culture is a way that we can help shape what that feels like. Values are a way we help shape our culture. And culture matters infinitely to an entrepreneur, because culture is what people feel when they interact with you. It's what your customers feel. It's what your employees feel. It's what your vendors feel. And so what your community feels. It's what the environment feels. It is a huge piece of our impact is the culture that we hold and we create. And when we develop strong values, we can shape that culture. We help people understand, how do we be with each other? How do we engage? What is okay and what's not okay in this culture? Because sometimes what's as important as knowing what's okay is knowing what's not okay. And that's how we start to discern, what does this culture actually look and feel like? And there's a really talented woman named Susan Salgado, who is a culture expert and has done a lot of work with the Union Square Hospitality Group in New York. which works with Danny Meyer's restaurants. If anyone's big foodies, you might know about Danny Meyer. He's a really famous restaurateur in New York City, and he creates really deep, meaningful culture and has some of the best restaurants that exist and people who want to work for him, which is really hard to create a restaurant where people really want to work at times. It can be a challenging environment, and he's become really well known for cultivating culture that people really understand and are able to operate well within. And Susan works with him very directly. One of her definitions of culture is that it is a shared system of values, beliefs, norms, and accepted behaviors. And the sharing is the most critical element. If leaders are not able to define or at least articulate the culture that they want to create, the group will naturally define it with the values, beliefs, norms, and behaviors that they're willing to tolerate from each other. So similar to that first slide, culture it exists, whether we want to acknowledge it or not. And so if we aren't defining culture, then the group's going to define it for us. And what we want to ask leaders to do is to be proactive in cultivating their culture so that the shared system of values, beliefs, and behaviors is something that they want to inspirationally bring into being in their space. So cultivating strong values and then operationalizing them. These are not things that we are just putting on a wall and saying that we believe in or on our website. It's literally the practices that we enact in everyday behavior about what's okay and what's not okay on our teams, or what we wish to experience and what is just out of bounds for the company. So when we're talking about our values, it's really important to make sure we're asking both of those things. And so this would be a good values reflection to come back to, is not just the values that you want to cultivate, but how are you practicing them? And how are you hiring with them? How are you choosing the people you collaborate and have relationships based on these? What are the ways you revisit them? When we had some questions earlier about scale and what happens when we're scaling, values are a really powerful practice. And I think of practices not just as something we do once and we're done, but something we're always returning to, and maybe even updating. Values don't necessarily have to stay set in stone forever. They are something that evolve and grow and are dynamic with time. So practices of values mean coming back to what are the values we said we value, and how are we doing on them? Is there something that we've missed that we now need to add? Is there something that's no longer important? And what does that look like? And that could look like at a team retreat. It could look like quarterly check-ins with the team. I've seen folks do kind of like a 0 to 10, each person who's active, who's in the company, rating the value and how they feel like it's being practiced, and then getting a chance to share why they feel like they're at that number. And so if you have anywhere below like an 8, if a 10 being the highest, then it might be a place to take a deeper look and say, are we actually practicing this? And if not, what does it look like for us to be putting this into place and actively embodying this in our culture? Because again, it's what's felt. It's how people feel about the way things are done. You most likely, I would imagine, you've walked into businesses or places of business where you just feel like something interesting is going on, or there's a buzz about it, or something's happening that you can sense by just being there. That is an example of culture and values in action. Similarly, we've probably all walked into spaces where you can just tell something's amiss and something's not happening in the way that is the most, compelling or vibrant or interesting. And that is an example of how we feel and are interacting with values. So most folks, I'm imagining, are already pretty familiar with values. This is in the ether, and is something that we're talking about more and more with business. And so what I want to leave with is just like, are we practicing them? And what does it look like to be practicing them? And how are we revisiting this on a regular and consistent basis? How is it woven into team, into meetings? As an example, one of the companies that is with the accelerator in Baltimore, I mentioned in the beginning, they're called Hungry Harvest. They were actually on Shark Tank a while ago, if anyone saw them. And they are a CSA that repurposes misshapen fruit that wouldn't sell at a farmer's market, but is still totally edible. And they offer it out as a community-supported agriculture subscription. And this is about their culture and how they run as a team. Evan is one of the founders and says that when he meets with folks weekly, he has goals to ask questions like, what are we not talking about or focusing on that we should be? How are you feeling overwhelmed, underwhelmed, not challenged enough, or why? What are your hurdles that I can help with? Do you have feedback for me? So the questions we ask are an example when we meet about the ways that we operationalize our values. And so those little details are the places that we can look to make sure that we're living the values the way that we most want to be, creating the culture and the team that we have. And Evan has a great example of this type of transparency. And I would say that a value here is transparency based on the questions that he's asking. And this is the way that he's bringing this into being. And one of the things that has happened because of that is folks are really proactive in bringing forward issues that they see showing up in the company, and they're able to detect if there's logistical errors in the deliveries, for example, and start assessing them quicker and going deeper into them and solving problems so that they can reduce turnover in their drivers and overall flow for how their products are getting to market. So these things are about basic things like, what do we ask in our company meetings? But it goes all the way down the line to empowering people to feel like they can speak up and share things with you and actually solve problems in proactive ways. People need to feel invited to be able to do that. And that's the role that a leader and entrepreneur has in creating that type of space. So that's an example there. Okay, and now we're gonna take it down the home stretch. I just wanna do a quick time check because I know we're probably coming up close to the end of our time. So we are going to talk about this last section, and I'll try to have the main bulk of content done at 3 Mountain Time. And then if you all want to ask any questions, I'll hang around for another 10 minutes or so. And I think Cecilia can too. So I'll make sure we get the content covered. But if you have a little extra time to stay and debrief some of this, I just want to give you all a heads up. If you have to go, no problem. You can go ahead and jump off right at the end of the hour. So let's jump into our last section, which is exploring our why. And why does why matter? This would be a personal reflection to come back to. And thinking about what I like to guide folks in when they're thinking about their why, especially if you're an entrepreneur or if you're supporting entrepreneurs, whatever the work that you feel called to do is, I encourage folks to think about the moment that you knew that this work was something you wanted to pursue, or the moment you had the idea and decided to act upon it. Going back to moments when we had inspiration is a really powerful way of revisiting that essential driver within us that's inspiring us to do what we do. I think often, especially with mission and vision, we can get into the intellectualization of everything, which is deeply important, and we really do go there. And when I talk about our why, I think about going beyond that into the moments within yourself where you felt inspired or where you felt goosebumps, Or if you can think of a moment, maybe when you were already doing your work and you just had this knowing that this was what you were supposed to be doing. And if you can revisit those moments and think about what was actually going on inside that moment and why that was so meaningful to you, that can offer a really rich grounding into our why and that deeper motivation that's inside of us. Has anyone seen the Simon Sinek TED Talk, How Great Leaders Inspire Action? Thumbs up if you've seen it. I'm seeing some nods. Yeah, if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it, and I can share the link here too. He goes into a really deep discovery about why, and why communicating our why is essential, because it gets us to this deeper place where we actually engage, rally, and attract other people. It's a really powerful way of communicating our story. And one of the things that's also in that TED Talk, he's describing the different aspects of our brain and how our limbic brain is the more primitive aspect of our brain, and it's the one that reacts to emotion. And when we can touch into a place that's deep and emotional in some way, and we can communicate from that place, we actually connect with the part of other people that's the part where they act from, because our limbic brain also ends up making a lot of our instinctual decisions. And it's the one that we then rationalize the reasons later, but we often make choices from that place. So when we can go deeper into that part of our brain that is really deeply connected to the why, the pulse of what we do and why it matters, and we tell those stories, we are able to get people to come do really interesting things with us. And so as a founder, it matters because it's how we can engage, rally, and attract support. It's how we can get folks wanting to be doing business with us. It's how we can find the right employees or team members to join us. If they resonate with the why, they're most likely willing to show up in ways that you can't really pay someone to do. So being able to go into that part and communicate that is a really powerful place for an entrepreneur to be able to express themselves, because it has a lot of potency for the work and the people and that ecosystem we talked about. How do you really strengthen that and bring things back to the bottom line of your business as well, right? Like who you're hiring and not having to have turnover so much, and getting customers and supporters and fundraisers, X, Y, or Z. It's also how we know our space within a marketplace of others. You can have two people who make the most amazing jams, let's say, but someone's doing it for a very particular why. Maybe they fell in love with cultivating raspberries, and there's a deep why as to what that story for them. And someone else is doing it because they want to create more healthier alternatives to what you put on your plate. So we can do the same thing and have a very different reason why. And being able to articulate that is a part of how we carve our niche in a marketplace. And lastly, it helps us to stay motivated and inspired. It helps us navigate the unknowns, and it helps us iterate. So when we can stay true to the reason why we do things, it allows us to make big changes and evolve and not lose the reason that we're here. And so that can be a big part of growing a business and scaling too, is when we really have to make huge shifts, we can stay anchored in the why of what we're doing. And that can be the place that allows us to have support and inspiration for whatever growth, as long as we're really anchored in that same motivation. And just a quick example to kind of cap us off, actually, from the bike share that I was a part of, we had a moment, the initial design that we had created included these stations that you'll see right here. We had designed a station-based bike sharing program, and we're intending to launch that. And the why that we had was that we wanted to change how people moved across a college campus. We designed these incredible stations and the station-based bike sharing program, and it was millions of dollars to create a pilot. So you can guess what the response to that was from college campus administrators, a big no. So what we had to then do was totally transform what the design of the system was. We kept our why, it never changed, still to change the way people moved around campus. We totally got rid of the stations and we created a text message based rent and return program so that people could just text to get a bike and text to return it. And there was a whole system on the back end that gave people combination codes and helped people unlock and lock the bikes the way that a station would. And through that design process for us, being able to let go of an enormous piece of what we were anchored in creating with our business, the only way we could do that was by staying true to the why and the values of the company about being eco-friendly, creating community, and having a fun way to get around. So these things have very practical purposes when we're getting into the design of the companies that we're building, in terms of creating guidance and having a way that we can anchor into something that's deeper than what we see at the surface. And reminding us of what it is we're building. When we're sitting there, you know, laying brick by brick, it's hard to see the whole house that we're building. So when we're clear about what it is that we're here to create, we can do the more monotonous things like laying one brick at a time, because we know what it is that we're here to make and create together. And as the resource for this, which you'll get with the slides, there's a little Adlib that we often use to guide folks, and if you haven't created a why yet, to just get yourself started. And so you'll get this, and this is a great place to do some free writing first, and then you can put it into a statement that looks like this, talking about the beliefs that guide your work, what are you here to offer, and what's the ultimate impact that you hope to make for folks. And that can be one way. It's not the only way by any means, but it can be one way to start putting together something that communicates your purpose to other people. So just as a recap, some of the new paradigms for leading a values-based business that we talked about. First, we covered leadership centered in love, mindfulness, and potential, creating potential. Then we talked about businesses that thrive when they're aware of and taking care of the living web of relationships that they're within, mapping that and seeing that and taking that into consideration when we run a company and make choices. Then tending to the heartbeat of our culture and the way that our values create that culture within the interactions that we have with others on a daily basis. So making sure the values are clear, and then how we interact with people in a regular way that can live those values out. And then lastly, having that clear sense of our deeper purpose as a source of renewal, motivation, and communication behind what you do, and being able to share that in your marketing material, in the way that you hire and work with employees, in the way that you talk to your customers, so that you can attract folks who believe in what you're here to do and want to be there and support you in that way as well. And yeah, I just want to leave you all with the fact that we're finding this out. There's no only one path. There isn't only one path. We're kind of lighting the way as we go and offering examples to others. And I hope that some of this has lit some inspiration for you all. And if you want to hang around, I would love to answer any questions or hear your experience with some of these things if you'd like to share, because I do think that's a helpful way that we learn. And if not, then I wish you an amazing path with your journey in entrepreneurship. And I'm going to include my information in the slides so that you can be in touch with me if you have any questions or want to ask about something or want to know more about this work. And